Right, you lot, let's talk about Aston Villa and more. Massive transfer news about the possible swap deal of Douglas Luiz and Weston Mckennie. Aston Villa obviously in a little bit of hot water, allegedly, with FFP, and Juventus being big interested in Douglas Luiz. Now, this could be a deal that could work for both teams, or it could be a deal that would really mean that Villa come off worse. We're going to look at both players for each of their own merits, look at their heat maps, where they operate on the football pitch, and then discuss whether this would be a good deal for Aston Villa both financially and on the pitch as we prepare for a Champions League campaign next season. There's going to be plenty of graphs on the screen for you guys to get into, loads of data to delve into. If you are enjoying the transfer content, leave a like, subscribe for much more, and as we start to transition into England content for the Euros as well. There's plenty more to come on the Let's Talk Villa channel, but let's get in to Douglas Luiz and Weston Mckennie. So as you can see on the screen, I think the first thing to take into consideration is the types of players that they are. Weston Mckennie is 25 years of age, currently playing for Juventus. Recently had that failed loan spell for Leeds in the Premier League, but it's Leeds. That club always seems to be, bottling it when it matters. So God knows what happened there. His current market value is around 25 million pounds, euros, dollars, whatever you want to say. It's transfer marked, however they do their things. And this season for Juventus, now bearing in mind he didn't play in Europe this season because Juventus actually didn't compete in Europe due to the breaches that they've had in the past with financial fair play. He played 38 games, getting no goals, but actually getting 10 assists. And he plays either centre mid or right mid. We're going to get more into the systems that Juventus and Aston Villa play and where these players fit in very shortly as well. Douglas Luiz, 1 year older, but recently only turning 26. I think he's literally 26 and 26 days old, with a market value sitting around £70 million. Played 53 times for Aston Villa this season, getting 10 goals and 10 assists, so double figures for both goals and assists, playing mainly that centre mid role. But like I said, it's important to realise the positions that these two players are playing before we get in to their stats. Aston Villa this season most likely were to line up in a 4-4-2, a 4-4-1-1 as seen on the screen. That was actually taken from our best performance this season when we beat Manchester City 1-0 at Villa Park, or in a 4-2-3-1. And it's interesting to note that the 4-4-2 that we'd line up in was technically down as a 4-4-2 double six, so with two pivots at the bottom, so almost like a 4-2-2-2. And Luiz, when he played his best this season, was next to Boubacar Kamara, who is more of an out-and-out holding midfield player, allowing Luiz to roam into that number 8 position. As you can see from his heat map, operates mainly on the left, floating out towards the left. I mean, you can see there's a massive red bit in the corner flag because he takes our corners and scored from corners a couple of times as well in his Aston Villa career. And he mainly plays, like I say, that 6 with the free ability to roam into the 8. He picks up the ball deep and high up the pitch, but a lot of it, you can see red and purple being his most used positions on the pitch, is in a central position. In fact, being around the halfway line is a massive purple patch for him, red as well, floating out to the right hand side, and he's pretty much here, there and everywhere, being what we'd call a midfield maestro. But how does that compare to Weston Mckennie? So as you can see on the screen, Juventus lined up primarily this season, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's 95% of their games, in a 3-5-2 with a flat midfield 5. As you can see on the screen in this game, Mckennie was almost the pivot in that midfield 5, playing in the middle. He effectively, and as you can see from his heat map, either played there where Rabiot is in that graphic or on the right hand side of midfield. And as you can see by his heat map, his main positions this season were actually on that right hand side of midfield. That's where he's picking the ball up. He played the 6, he played the 8, but he also played out on the right. So you have to understand when we look at their stats, these are very different players, and Weston Mckennie is not going to be brought into Aston Villa to play that right mid slot. We have Moussa Diaby and Leon Bailey who have that on lock. We're not going to be disrupting the flow of the team, bringing in a centre mid to play right mid, if that makes any sense. But as you can see from his heat map, that is where he's operated this season. He hasn't really picked up the ball much in central positions, despite playing the positions that he does play. He has a bit of a hot patch around his own goal at the bottom of the pitch. But like I say, Juventus, again, are playing a 3 in midfield. So even if he is in there, there's a lot more of the ball to be shared amongst the players that he is playing with. So just want to bear in mind before we get into their stats, which we're going to look at now. So now, as you can see from their stats, Douglas Luiz statistically is more impressive, and we're going to get onto that later on in the video as well, with an average rating of 7.28 compared to Weston Mckennie's 7.10. This is just his league, or their league stats as well this season. This isn't taking into account Europe, etc., etc., and cup games. Of course, we scroll down, the attacking output for Douglas Luiz is clearly more impressive than Weston Mckennie's. He is ultimately, guys, a better player. No one's going to dispute that Douglas Luiz is a better player than Weston Mckennie. Offensively, you look at his output there, he dwarfs McKennie's stats in terms of shooting and passing as well, in terms of the passes he's completed, etc., etc. The only thing that Weston Mckennie does have is actually the assists. We go down to defending stats, and this is something that historically Juventus fans have said that McKennie does struggle with, and these stats almost highlight that. Douglas Luiz, by far, outputting the superior numbers when it comes to defending. In terms of the only thing that I think McKennie has more of is aerial duels won, but his percentage is actually lower. And again, Douglas Luiz has won more tackles whilst having a higher percentage as well. And then if we look up there, that's a direct comparison between the two players. So Douglas Luiz and Weston Mckennie from this season. And Douglas Luiz is the blue and McKennie is the purple. And in terms of actual defensive actions, McKennie does slightly outdo Douglas Luiz. But then you look at stuff like forward passes, forward pass completion rate, key passes, McKennie just pips him. You can see that, and progression as well up the pitch. It is a lot. A lot of positives for Douglas Luiz. But Weston Mckennie is holding his own in that regard. And I'll just scroll through some other like stat head comparison stats on the screen to effectively show you that yes, I am not under the illusion that Weston Mckennie is anywhere near as elite of a player as Douglas Luiz. I think Douglas Luiz is clearly the superior player out of the two. This swap deal has come about with a cash incentive as well for Aston Villa. It wouldn't just be a direct swap deal. And look at all the stats. Luiz is a better player, albeit a different player than McKennie. Like I say, plays a different role in a different system, and they are both asked to do different things, but Luiz is simply better. And that brings me on to the main point of this video. Should Aston Villa swap Douglas Luiz for Weston Mckennie in a blockbuster trade deal? Ultimately, no. I think Douglas Luiz, when he has a out-and-out holding mid next to him, like a Boubacar Kamara, is simply one of the best and most elite box-to-box wingers, midfielders in the Premier League. There's no doubt about that. I think his stats this season speak for themselves on that, and this is why so many big clubs are interested in him. Now, there are a couple of other factors to take into consideration when we ultimately decide whether this swap deal would be good for Villa or not. First of all, reputable journalists in the UK are tweeting out that Aston Villa need to sell a relatively blockbuster player by the 30th of June so that we don't get massively stung by financial fair play and financial sustainability rules this summer. And let's not forget, Juventus got stung by those rules and actually got annexed from Europe last season. So the stakes are incredibly high if we want to keep on building our brand. There have been the likes of Jacob Ramsey and John Duran brandished around as possible names that could go, but there's also been a lot of speculation and reporting that Douglas Luiz is another player that would be happy to let go if the right deal came in. Now, clearly, Douglas Luiz has a much higher market value than Weston Mckennie. Weston Mckennie's played 19 games in the Premier League when he was on loan for Leeds, and he didn't look that great, let's be honest. Now, I will say, I've been looking up articles from Juventus fans this season who are actually pretty impressed with how Weston Mckennie has played for them, and they've actually said that he's probably their best and most consistent midfielder. So do I think that we're getting an absolute dud of a footballer in this deal? Absolutely not. I think Weston Mckennie is good, and I think under the likes of Emery, who will micromanage him until he's the best he can possibly be, he could be a decent option for Villa going forward. But we do have to admit that we're losing quality in this deal, and that's why there's no chance for me that this would be a straight player swap. This is going to have either multiple players or cash incentives in it as well. Now, there's also the talk that Juventus are willing to sell, I think it's Careza, I can't pronounce his name. I'll pop a picture of him up. And then another young winger as well that they had out on loan, who they value at around 35 million. Now, if it was Chiesa, that's the one. If it was Chiesa and McKennie for Douglas Luiz, I still don't think it's quite enough. I think I'll take Chiesa, McKennie, and maybe 20 million as well, or 15 million euros on top of those two players, because it solves two positions for Villa, and obviously for FFP we're still getting that money in. Now, I do think we need a bit more money for FFP, which is why I think the only way for me that this deal is feasible, if we're looking to balance the books and we need to get money in, I genuinely think it has to be McKennie plus 50 to 60 million pounds or euros minimum. That's the only way I think I could see this deal being widely accepted. I've seen some people saying they would take McKennie and 40 million, maybe, but I think it has to be, for me, in the ranges of 50 to 60. Douglas Luiz, there was talk of him being sold for upwards of 80 to 100 million. Weston Mckennie valued by Juventus at around 25 to 30 million. So there needs to be that 50-60 to top up to how we value Douglas Luiz, for me, on top. And even then, I feel like this one would leave a bit of a bitter taste in the mouths of Aston Villa fans. But like I say, for me, the only way this swap deal benefits Villa to a point where we should really be considering taking it is if it was Weston Mckennie coming to Villa for Douglas Luiz and a lovely 60 or 50 to 60 million euros on top of that. But let me know what you guys think. There's a lot of other news coming out around Aston Villa and possible transfers, so I'll be covering that as soon as I can, as well as my tier list for Villa this season. Be sure to watch that one, because there might be a couple of opinions that annoy or vindicate a couple of your guys as well. But as always, leave a comment down below. I'd like to know what you guys think about this proposed swap deal. I will see you guys soon. Up the Villa. Be nice to everyone. Let's hopefully keep Douglas Luiz.